Good afternoon, everyone. We would like to begin by acknowledging traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work from today. We pay our respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past, present, and emerging, and celebrate their cultural contribution to our society. Always was, always will. On behalf of the Mental Health Foundation Australia's chairperson, Vasan Srinivasan, I welcome all of you here today for our virtual forum on substance abuse and mental health. My name is Abby, and I'm the Secretary for the MHFA's Victorian Multicultural Ambassadors and the co-chair for the ACT Multicultural Ambassadors. I am also a perioperative and post-anaesthetics unit pharmacist for one of our private hospitals here in Melbourne. Today, I will help facilitate and moderate our discussion with our panelists. National Mental Health Month is an initiative of the MHFA to advocate for and raise awareness of Australian mental health issues. It is an important time where the Australian community comes together to raise awareness that #mental health matters. National Mental Health Month is unlike many other mental health awareness campaigns. It aims to bring together in a nationwide conversation about mental health and maintain this conversation of Australian mental health for the entire month and thereon out. As a part of National Mental Health Month, the Foundation is organising these mental health forums on important topics, and today we are here to discuss substance abuse and mental health. Roughly 50% of individuals with severe mental health disorders have been seen to misuse substances. 37% of people have misused alcohol, and 57% of people have overused or either taken illicit substances or prescription medication. These people have been shown to have at least one serious mental health illness. Struggling with a mental health disorder and also concurrently struggling with addiction can become quite overwhelming. This virtual forum aims to bring focus to important matters and hope to inspire further research into this area and innovate further treatment options. Day in and day out, I speak to patients about their medications. Before their surgeries, we have a chat about all the medications that they take, whether that be things they use daily or occasionally. We also talk about what pain relief they use, what medications they use for anxiety and depression, as well as what medications they might use to help them sleep at night. I also counsel day surgery patients prior to discharge from the hospital as to what medications they go home with. Opioid-based pain medications play a very key role in managing pain post-surgery, as well as managing a lot of chronic pain for certain conditions. These medications are the ones that are most prone to the risk of abuse. The stigma associated with people who take this medication is very disappointing to see from a first-hand basis. I'm often told by patients that they don't want to take these medications home because they've been told that they can become addicted and they don't want to risk it. It's extremely important to put people at the center of the discussion about their health. I'd like to welcome all of you warmly who have joined us via Zoom and Facebook Live to today's forum. Thank you so much for taking your time to help facilitate discussion around this very important topic. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I would like to invite all of you to watch a video celebrating the Mental Health Foundation Australia's 90-year journey here.
A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Mental Health Foundation Australia's journey began 90 years ago. It dawned in 1930 with just a founder and vision, which was to reach and impact Victoria. Now we have a presence in all states and changing lives for over 100,000 people throughout Australia. Our organisation's biggest initiative yet is our National Mental Health Month. Our month-long initiative is to advocate and raise awareness on Australian mental health. Our vision is to recharge and educate as many Australians as possible to help reduce stigma and facilitate positive and non-judgmental discussions surrounding the important topic of mental health in Australia. With the theme being Mental Health Matters, the awareness is cumulative. In 30 events we have organised to reach the community in all mental health subject matters affecting our lives today. To further continue our journey of 1,000 miles, the Walk for Mental Health has transitioned from a Victoria-only walk to being a nationwide community walk, where anybody from anywhere in Australia can connect with us and walk with us virtually to spread the impact and awareness of mental health. We pride ourselves with making sure all our programs are for the community and are powered by the community. We have a vast growing network of multicultural ambassadors who are part of our program to further the community voice in promoting positive mental health and well-being. Our multicultural network has inspired our educational and multicultural webinars as an initiative to help power Sodality to cope with success during the pandemic, to promote the understanding of unique cultural and ethnic heritage in Australia, and the development of culturally responsible and responsive curricula. The Mental Health Foundation of Australia conducted the multicultural research to continue on the development of the fast-growing multicultural Sodality in Australia. With the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, the MHFA has successfully committed the Power Hour of services and the reach to the community. With the helpline hours extended, we are here to show Australians we can be a shoulder to lean on and can be dialed to assist in all mental health matters. Our impact flows into the COVID-19 meal delivery response with the help of the community, local business and our multicultural ambassadors. It has promoted one vision, which is to serve others before self during this time of uncertainty. With over 45,000 meals delivered, we continue to work with the Department of Health, the Human Services, the Salvation Army and the Australian Multicultural Foundation to continue this success. As we continue to work to deepen understanding the importance of mental well-being and educating the community, let's work together to bring better mental health for all.
I would now like to introduce Anthony Petiona, the co-founder and chairman of Alcohol and Drug Awareness Australia. Anthony has over 13 years of online and digital experience and is a pioneer of online technology in Australia. He has been a founder and CEO of multiple leading technology companies, previously holding positions on the executive board of companies such as carsales.com. He is currently the CEO of a leading Australian technology company, Wiz Technologies, as well as a major shareholder in partnership with Nine Entertainment Co. in the online automotive business Car Advice and Drive. Beyond a successful corporate career, Anthony has had his own journey with addiction and has been an active member of the addiction recovery since 2015. Anthony is a co-founder and chairman of Alcohol and Drug Awareness Australia. Please welcome Anthony Petiona.
Thanks, Abby. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate the Mental Health Foundation of Australia for all the great work that they're doing. I've really been privileged to see initiatives like Mental Health Month really continue to grow over the last couple of years. We've had a close association with the foundation now through the organisation that I do chair, Alcohol and Drug Awareness Australia. So it's wonderful to see, and I commend you for all the great work that you guys are doing. I've been asked today to share a little bit of my own personal story and my journey through addiction. And I do kind of sit here today representing day to day. I'm involved as the CEO, as Abby said, of a leading Australian technology company, Wiz Technologies. I also am the chair of Alcohol and Drug Awareness Australia. But more importantly, I'm a recovering drug addict. And for me, if I can spend the next kind of 10 minutes taking you through a bit of my own journey and the kind of chaos and the spiral that I went through with addiction, but then also a bit of hope around how I came out the other side. For me, my journey with addiction really began in my kind of early teens. Not dissimilar to many people in Australia. I grew up in a household which was a loving household, but it was one that certainly had a culture of things like binge drinking, and things like curiosity around alcohol consumption was certainly a part of my teenage years. And I experimented with things like drinking alcohol. Into my later teens, I experimented with things like marijuana and into party and recreational drugs, not knowing that I was really opening Pandora's box on what would be a good 15-year progression and spiral through addiction. And for me, addiction really became something more serious in my life and started to affirm more consistently as I got into my own corporate career. And that corporate career was one where I stepped into the media and technology sector. Being young and impressionable, often filled with a fair bit of fear that I was a bit out of place, I started to make wrong life choices. And for me, what I thought was something that absolutely was just recreational kind of drug use on the weekends, I always associated drinking and drug use to social settings, was something that continued to spiral over many years. And for me, it went from things like drinking on a Friday and a Saturday into parties progressing into the Sunday. And there are all these artificial boundaries in your mind that you think you'll never cross when it comes to substance use. And for me, it was certainly things like I never thought I would use substances during the week. And eventually those Friday nights went into Saturdays and Sundays, as I described, and the Mondays became really difficult. And I'd find myself using drugs through the week. I never thought I would use substance on my own. And eventually I crossed that line as well. I then categorized drugs and drug use into different categories and there were lines that I thought I would never cross. And one of those was I never thought that I would smoke drugs. And in the end, for me, I was someone that was a daily user of amphetamines. I was smoking drugs. I was using drugs on a daily basis. And although on the surface, I was trying to keep up appearances, behind the scenes, I was losing everything of importance in my life. And come early 2015, life on paper looked like it was going okay. I was doing my best of trying to kind of hold up my career, although, you know, the warning signs were certainly there and those closest to me knew that things weren't right. But I was always wearing a mask and I was never going to put up my hand and say that I had a problem, nor did I think that there was a solution out there for someone like me. I always thought I was different, as can often be the case with addiction. It really is the disease of self-obsession, and I was no exception to that. And then I found myself in early 2015 where, again, although I was trying to keep up appearances to the outside world, I was losing everything of importance in my life. I had a young pregnant partner at the time where we had a reasonably healthy relationship in terms of our relationship towards each other. Yet my wrong lifestyle choices were really putting strain on our relationship. And I remember vividly my partner deciding to leave me one day. She was pregnant and kind of sharing with me that she didn't want to tell her unborn child one day, whether they were 2 or 10 or older in life, that they had lost their father because I couldn't get on top of this disease of addiction. I thought that would become something that I could utilize and motivate myself to change. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. And by that stage of my life, I was very much using against my will. It had become my solution to the good and the bad. In the high times, I would celebrate. In the low times, I would find comfort in my substance use. And in 2015, when I started to lose everything of importance in the way of relationships and key relationships in my life, I thought the only way out was to take my life. And I found myself standing on the edge of a 10-story balcony in Queens Road in Melbourne, thinking the only way out was to end it all. And just by chance, a close friend of mine managed to intervene through the whole process. They'd convinced the building concierge where I was living at the time to let them in. I'd been isolated for some days, coming up to a week at that point in time. And they managed to intervene through the whole process. And that for me was what we call a rock bottom in recovery. I finally threw up my hands and said, I can't do this alone and I need help. Not that I found recovery straight away. It still took some months for me to be able to kind of surrender to the fact that I was going to require some help to get through this. And I ended up going into an inpatient stay in a rehabilitation centre. At the time, I should say, I was the public face and the CEO of a company in partnership with Fairfax Media. So I had all these fears around and justifications as to why I couldn't go and get the help that I really desperately needed. Yet I decided to kind of take the leap of faith and with the support of some very important people around me that gave me a lot of love, I went into an inpatient stay in drug and alcohol treatment facility. And I went through that journey and it really opened up my mind to a new way to live. Fast forward to today, I'm very grateful. I've got a wonderful life. All those important relationships I've managed to mend and I've got wonderful businesses that I'm involved in. And one of the things when I came out of recovery that became very clear to me was when you look at the problems and the challenges that we face now and here in Australia and all around the world, but in Australia in particular, and Abby reeled off some of the statistics in her opening address, We're one of the highest illicit drug using nations now per capita in the whole world. The highest cause of death in this country between the age of 15 and 44 across males and females is suicide. And something that became very apparent to me going through my own journey and potentially being, a suicide kind of statistic was one, when we look at the solutions in this space, they're all very targeted towards the reactive end. We invest a lot of public and private money into things like law enforcement and rehabilitation centres, which is absolutely needed. Yet the success rates when people get down to those rock bottoms like I did, unfortunately, are pretty low. And so I partnered up with someone that really taken me through a journey of recovery, someone that helped me turn my life around. And they had this vision to get up the funnel more. How could we empower people to make better life choices so they didn't have to go through the journey that we did? And when I looked back retrospectively over my own kind of 15-year spiral through addiction, there are all these pivotal points in time where, had I had the knowledge that I had today, I would have made completely different life choices. So we decided to put together a team where we went and commissioned a whole heap of research. We put together some quality training programs. We decided on workplace being the distribution path for those programs, with a view that the workplace was a really unique setting where you have people's captive attention and you can influence positive outcomes. And that was going back 4.5 years ago. Fast forward to today, we've really been able to establish ourselves as a leading training organisation when it comes to AOD-related programs and mental health-related programs, primarily targeting distribution via the workplace. And our view is to provide content for people that is easy to understand and absorb, but also empowers people how to self-analyse and reflect on decisions that they make in their own life, how to then recognise problems and warning signs in others, and more importantly, what kind of support avenues are out there for people that might be struggling with these types of issues. We've had over 30,000 people in the last 4 years through our training programs. We count people as clients such as Coca-Cola Australia, some of the larger trade union groups around the country. And we're very proud to see that, that we've been able to develop a program that's really empowering people with knowledge how to make better life choices. Because when you look at the challenges that we face around this stuff, it really doesn't spare anyone. It touches every rooftop in this country. Beyond our training and education programs, we also provide a range of more crisis type support services as well. So we do a lot of work around helping families with things like intervention when it comes to dealing with someone that might be struggling with addiction. In the last 18 months, we've probably put a couple of hundred people through inpatient treatment. And at the core of what we do, we kind of describe it as a bit of a 100-year plan. We'd really like to curb the trend around these issues that we see in Australia. So I'm very proud to be a part of today's panel. I hope you guys can hear a good message in my story. I should say, a key point of difference with our organisation is all of our facilitators also have been through a very similar journey to me. So we deliver very structured programs, but it comes from a perspective of lived experience. And they say, the opposite to addiction is connection. And certainly that's one of the things that we try and always generate as an outcome with any of our training that we run. So Abby, thank you for having me today. I welcome being a part of the panel for this afternoon's discussion.
Thank you, Anthony, so much for sharing your story. We really appreciate it. I just want to echo something that Anthony has already mentioned, which is that substance abuse disorders is a health crisis and a public health crisis that we do need to take quite seriously. It is not something that should be managed in a criminal fashion as it has to this point in time, especially in Australia. So we'll move on to our panel discussion for today. So joining Anthony on the panel first off is Dr. Alberto Veloso. Alberto is a part of the MHFA Scientific Advisory Committee. He's a specialist child psychiatrist and general paediatrician from Melbourne. He is a fellow of the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists and the Royal Australian College of Physicians. Alberto provides integral and holistic mental health care. He has specialist training in the assessment of mental health disorders, including mood disorders, bipolar disorder, psychosis, substance abuse disorders, PTSD, eating disorders, ADHD, and autism spectrum disorder. He is skilled in the biological and physiological treatment of mental health disorders, which may include prescribing medications or engaging with individuals or family therapy as well. Please welcome Alberto.
Thank you for having me, Abby.
In addition to both of our panelists, we also have Professor Trichuru Vidyasagar joining us as well. Sagar is a neuroscientist with a particular interest in vision. He's a professor in the Department of Optometry and Vision Sciences at the University of Melbourne and is also an honorary professorial fellow of Florey Institute of Neuroscience in Mental Health. He is a lab director of Visual and Cognitive Neuroscience Laboratory. The lab's main aim is to understand the neural basis of visual perception, attention, and memory, with a particular focus on the visual system. Sagar's career-long work in this area has led to a new theory of how basic attributes of a visual scene, such as lines, colors, and movements, are coded by the brain. More recent work on attention has helped to shed light on the neural mechanisms that different parts of the brain use to communicate with each other. This research has led to significant insights into the neural processes that enable the brain to search for objects in the cluttered world around us and match our perceptions to stored memories. In turn, helping us to understand a number of neurological disorders such as dyslexia, autism, ADHD, and schizophrenia. Welcome, Sagar.
Thank you.
So we have a number of questions submitted to us for discussion prior to the event, so we'll run through those first. I can also see a few questions in the chat box, which we will get to hopefully should we have some time. So our first question is directed at Alberto. What is the best recovery method for those who are abusing or misusing alcohol in terms of their mental health? And this question comes from Omar.
Thank you, Omar. It's a great question, and I think that there's firstly, I also wanted to acknowledge and thank Anthony for sharing that story. It's and I think that Anthony's story actually helps paint the picture about what is the best form of recovery and how to help someone. A couple of times it's already been said, including a question here in the Q&A box about interconnectedness and what Anthony said, the opposite of addiction is connection. And what we know of in the neuroscience is that Homo sapiens as a species requires connection for our brains to be integrated well enough to function well. And in fact, the people who have severe mental illness and the people who resort to substances, the common thread in all of them is the fact that they have difficulties in their relationships and their connections with people. So, and that's a chicken or the egg scenario, because often there are relational problems before the substance abuse, but then also the relational problems into afterwards. So of all, there are 1,000 things that you can try and do to help someone with substance abuse disorder, but that facilitation of rebuilding trust, that facilitation of rebuilding their relationships is probably going to be the most important. Now that is the cliche, that is a bit of a cliche because we've heard that a lot as well, and it's because it's true. To me, I work with lots of children and adolescents, and my question and the challenge for all of us, I think, as a service, also in terms of service delivery question, is how do we catch these issues earlier? How do we help? How could we have helped Anthony at 15? How could we have helped the mental health issues at that time before they get to that point? That would be, so to me, it's about early intervention and it's about focusing on relationships.
Thank you for that, Alberto. I was wondering if either of our other panel members have anything to add to that question. I'll read it out again, which is, what is the best recovery method for those who are abusing or misusing alcohol in terms of their mental health?
Yeah, I'm happy to make a quick comment and really just echoing much of what Dr. Alberto had to say. I think a couple of things. When we consider alcohol, although it's a legal drug, it's a very dangerous one. It's still the biggest killer across society in Australia. It also has a real physical dependence. So depending upon someone's drinking behaviours and how serious their alcoholism is, it's quite a dangerous drug to withdraw from too. So there often is a real medical angle and support that's required with someone going through alcoholism treatment. when it comes to recovery and getting people the help they need, there are a couple of kind of key and fundamental but basic ingredients that are required. And one is a willingness from the individual to want to change too. And often the way of finding that kind of willingness and that courage to want to get help requires your support networks around you to not enable you in any way. And often what we feel in our hearts to try and help someone that we love can often be the opposite and the thing that's keeping them sick. We want to love people back to life a lot of the time when they're struggling with addiction. Yet if we're not putting evidence on the table as to the impact that their life is having on them as an individual, on their support networks around them, often they will struggle to gain that awareness that they need to do something about their addiction. And so one of the things, depending upon the individual circumstances, is you need to look at the networks around someone. You need to think about interventions. You need to think about how you can inspire and find that willingness in an individual to go and seek the help that they require. Then there are a range of kind of support channels and pathways that someone can go down. There's the anonymous kind of 12-step programs that are out there that are free. There are inpatient, outpatient treatment facilities that people can look at. But certainly at the core of everything we do, and again, to echo everything Dr. Alberto had to say, is prevention is the best cure around this stuff. So if people's drinking behaviours are starting to cross lines of falling into a risky drinking kind of category, some of the best things that we can do is gift people with some awareness around that. Because one thing I have certainly learnt being a part of recovery forums for many, many years now is that the journey is almost the same for everyone. It's just a different timeline. We lose things of importance. We start to use against our will. Our life deteriorates. And so there's a really powerful message in that. And if you can intervene and get in early before someone's down at a rock bottom, the chances of success and kind of clawing their life back are always that much better. So great question.
Wonderful. So this is a really nice segue into our next question, which is open to all our panel members. In few cultures around the world, Christmas or any given holiday is incomplete without alcohol or wine. Office get-togethers, family gatherings, weddings, or even a good date night calls for some wine. How do we ensure to keep the line intact between socially acceptable drinking to transform into a regular consumption and then advancing into addiction?
Okay, that's a very challenging question. Of course, we are getting the festival time, Christmas time, and we don't know how much movement will be allowed. I hope we don't have a third wave in Melbourne, in Victoria. Hopefully not. So anyway, in times of such family gatherings, it is true that people drink some alcohol, and I can't think of any kind of simple rule of thumb one can adopt, but simply be aware of the many things that Anthony and Alberto told us. And in fact, as Alberto mentioned earlier, social interactions are extremely important. And in fact, if you look at many factors which affect our mental well-being, right at the top is such kind of social interactions, which need not be in a big party. Even having one person with whom, one or two people, or even one person in whom you have full trust and engage with them on a regular basis goes a long way in reducing stress and improving mental health. And so that's kind of family interactions are extremely important, whether you do it physically face-to-face or virtually. That's very important. But to reduce alcohol consumption during that time, I don't know whether Anthony has any particular suggestion there.
Yeah, sure. And I don't think there is any one kind of rule that applies here or technique that might apply. But one of the key things, and it's coming out in everyone's kind of answers here, is awareness is key. So making sure that people are aware of, what categorizes something as risky drinking behavior. Even understanding a standard drink in this country, sometimes there's a real misconception around what an actual standard drink is. These are all basic but really important things. As a result of COVID, people's drinking behaviours is certainly something, and the change in people's drinking behaviours is something that's been quite alarming. If you find yourself drinking on your own, if you're drinking, if you're not having alcohol-free days through the week, these are all things that are progressing someone into a category of risky drinking. Now, abstinence is not for everyone, so the solution here is to not say don't have a drink at all. All I would really highly encourage everyone is to understand drinking, understand what standard drinks are and what risky drinking kind of categories involve, and then just keep yourself safe and well and in check within those boundaries.
I'd also like to add to that too, that knowledge is incredibly important, and part of that is self-knowledge, and that there's a couple of questions that have popped up about the culture of drinking in Australia, and I think Anthony talked about how the Friday night, the Saturday night becomes the Sunday night, and the Mondays, and then every day. It is, and so self-awareness in terms of drinking for a particular reason, or drinking to cope with stress, or drinking to cope with feeling sad, they're going to go hand to hand with just the noticing of how much your drinking has increased, or not being able to control that that moderation that people talk about or aim for.
Yeah, and I think, again, just to further that, there is a real binge drinking culture in Australia too. And I share with you guys quickly, because I remember this vividly, when I first went into the treatment facility that I did, I went through my GP, and there was a questionnaire that I filled in, and it said, do you have a drinking problem? And it was no. Do you drink every day? No. And I thought, I'm fine here, because I never associated alcohol as being a part of my addiction problems. Then it said, how many standard drinks would you consume in a week? And it was 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 plus. And for me, even at that point in my life, it was still probably 40 or 50, but I only drank twice a week, on a Friday and a Saturday type thing. And I had no awareness, even though I thought I was a reasonably smart guy, that kind of understood I wasn't running my life completely right. But I had no awareness around what such a high risk category I fell into when it came to my alcohol consumption. So awareness and self-awareness is absolutely key. Making sure you don't fool yourself with any justifications around what might put you in risky kind of categories as well.
Thank you, everyone. Once again, a really nice segue into our next question, which is, I'm interested in how one addiction is often swapped for another addiction, giving up drugs but becoming an alcoholic. What is in the addictive behavior that there seems to be something that fills the space when one addiction is given up, that something needs to take its place? This question is from Alison.
I might have a go at starting that. It's a frequent question that we actually think about, because, and I admit young people to inpatient units. Part of it is, a focus. The main focus is their mental health, but often there are these, what do I do with the daily marijuana use, or the alcohol use that I'm using, which makes me lose control, and it makes me really angry and hurts all my relationships. And the problem there is that, what they notice when they come into an inpatient unit and they've become brave enough to do that, and often it's to address their mental health. Well, what they notice is that if they've had a week where they haven't been able to smoke marijuana, or they haven't had the same access to alcohol, what then really comes out is the emptiness, or the real emotional pain that they were treating with those substances. So often it becomes that when you might work really hard on this one specific drug that you're trying not to use anymore, and when you take that away, the underlying issues are still rear its ugly head in some way. And so then then there's the risk of relapse, or using something else. So that's to me it's a clue that there are other issues that haven't been addressed in terms of, and again, that knowledge as well as self-awareness need to both go hand in hand.
Yeah, it's really well answered. I think, the chemistry of addiction, the reality is there is a chemical release of things like dopamine in your brain when you're using any kind of substance or acting out with any kind of addictive type behavior. So there is some science to it too. You see it a lot in recovery where people substitute one addiction for another. I think what's really key, and I always describe it in this way, one of the things that recovery teaches you is you get back in connection with some inherent kind of qualities and principles that I think are in all of us as human beings. And when you can reintroduce kind of principles such as honesty, you find a way to understand what was driving that addictive behavior in your life. And it requires some work on yourself on the inside. And then you get an ability to arrest addictive behavior in many ways. So I think it's key that there needs to be some self-discovery and work at an individual level and with your support networks to be able to navigate your way through addiction without it just affirming itself into something else. You know, addiction can come in the form of, and the chemical release in your brain from buying someone a present. You know, it's the chemistry is very much the same at times. You see it with prescription and illicit drugs. The brain doesn't know the difference, whether you're buying a drug from, you know, the corner or you're getting it from your pharmacist. And yet the justifications when it comes to prescription medication addiction can be, and the denial can be that much stronger. Often it's a tougher addiction to break because it's an easier one to justify. So if that gives any insight to my thoughts on it.
If I may add something to what Anthony said, there are a couple of things which may be quite fundamental in this. One is that, as Anthony said, is a chemical basis for many of the mental illnesses we come across, and also and how it may be related to things like substance abuse, is that you know, some of us, we are on a whole spectrum of. Some people are more sort of seeking sort of excitement more, and sort of risk-taking behavior is in all of us to varying degrees, and that will impel us to sort of leave one drug and get on to another one, which may affect us mentally in some way or other. But I mean, maybe the causality in all these things is not so well established. We don't know very well whether one causes the other or not. So there is still much of a debate. But apart from the chemical basis for some of the mental illnesses, which we are understanding more and more, and we have made a huge progress in the last 50 to 100 years in understanding this, and there are quite a few effective medications. But still, we know that despite the psychotherapy and also the medication, still we are still not fully on top of things, and still there are depression, for example, which cannot be treated, and there is certainly a link between some sort of link between substance abuse and that, and whether one causes the other, we don't really know how much it is, but certainly one can aggravate the symptoms. And one of the things we are coming to understand more, I'm not a clinician, but I'm a basic neuroscientist. One of the things we are trying to understand now more and more is, on top of the chemistry, is kind of how the different brain areas interact with each other. You heard about EEG, the oscillations you see in the brain that you can record from, but you can also record these things. We are doing that at a much finer level, and we see how the different parts of the brain communicate with each other, and there is a lot of disruption of these things in various conditions such as depression and schizophrenia. But now we are only beginning to understand how use of various substances like cannabis also affects these basic processes. So there could be some underlying thing that we get over one but switch on to something else. So this is still we need to understand more about the brain, I suppose, to get a full understanding of this.
Thank you. We've actually got a little question in our chat box, which goes on really nicely from our question here from Michelle, which is, what causes overlapping substance abuse issues? For example, prescription medications, alcohol, cannabis, or the combination of all three with gambling thrown in?
I was actually hoping for an answer from Anthony from this too, but I'm sure he'll come up with something. Because, you know, I think that this is something that I thought about as the questions have gone on, is that, you know, I think Anthony said there's many types of things that can cause the same pleasure response in our brains, and you know and there's many forms of addiction. You know, there's sex addiction, there's gambling, there's shopping, there's whatever it is that we can that we can use as a you know, as a behavior that can stimulate that, you know, those pleasure centers that stimulate that dopamine release, to give us that sense of pleasure, and also as a, you know, as a way of dampening down our arousal or stress response that we might have. So and you know, I think that, you know, that it's a big challenge in the industry of people helping with it, you know, trying to help people with addictions, because there are so many different types of addictions that people are dealing with all at the same time.
You're spot on, and I think at a primitive level, you know, looking for that pleasure response, you're continually chasing it too, and it becomes something completely beyond your conscious control. And you see it as you progress into different substances, as addiction, as I said in my story, affirmed itself more regularly into my life, because you're always looking for something just to get through, whether you're feeling down or whether you're feeling good. It's that pleasure response that you're almost on autopilot chasing. And certainly with some substances in particular, you know, the chemical response is that much greater than others, but it's also associated to other things. I think there is also an element of lifestyle and environments that come into play here as well. Certainly for me, you know, addiction came in multiple forms through the way my lifestyle had continued to evolve as I looked for that pleasure response with the substances that I was using.
Let's actually keep going on that note of that dopamine release. So there's a lot of research out there to show that a like on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter has a very similar dopamine release to addiction. So I've got another question here, which is, we are in a predominantly media-driven society. How do you think the past 5 years have been in general on an influence of alcohol and other socially acceptable forms of drug taking?
I'm happy to give some thoughts there. I think firstly, we do live in a digital world where we're highly stimulated now. You can certainly see it, having young children myself. You can certainly see how intuitive a lot of these digital devices are, but they trigger that chemical release and that pleasure release in their brains. And you can see addictive behaviors forming at such a young age now when it comes to digital devices. I do believe that, you know, treatment for digital addiction and digital detox and stuff will certainly be something of the future that we need to absolutely consider. In terms of the media making things more socially acceptable and in terms of the mainstream, I think it's something we as a society need to really always check our conscience and just know and just look at, are we doing the right things by our youth and those that are more impressionable and vulnerable to perhaps how, you know, some of these kind of lifestyle choices around things like substance and alcohol are more socially accepted and less moderated through some of these digital environments and social media platforms. It then comes back to your immediate network. You know, you need to be close and connected with your loved ones. You need to be able to have open conversations, empower people with as much knowledge to know, so when it comes to being exposed to this type of thing, they have a level of resilience and understanding of how to navigate what feelings might come up for them and ways that they can get through it in life.
Yes, I'd like to add a little bit to what Anthony was saying. Yeah, this kind of addictive behavior is, I mean, there is a basic system in the brain which sort of, you know, seeks that out. And it's there in all of us, you know. And particularly this addiction to the digital devices is something that's very, we should really look at it more carefully because becoming increasing now. And it affects in a number of ways. One is that it takes away our time and we get hooked on it and we don't do other things which we should be doing. And the other thing that's happening is that it really eats into our sleeping time. And sleep is something extremely important for mental health. And I mean, probably of all the things that I can think of, sleep is the single most important thing in our lives. And we should really sleep 7 to 8 hours every night. That's really important. And you also see that in the case of many mental illnesses like depression, sleep is seriously affected, and also in schizophrenia and in mania. Manic episodes, I mean, sleep is something affected, and the other way too, that sleep is very important for mental health, and it is seriously affected by our increasing addiction to digital devices. Yeah.
I think I also want to say, Abby, that that the screen, there's so many layers to this. That in the children that we see, particularly those children who perhaps have inherited or are born with brains that aren't particularly good at integrating all the different parts inherently, and so they might attract a diagnosis of ADHD or autism as well. So what we find in those kids is the more time they spend on their screens and that more screen stimulation, you definitely see this endpoint of increasing aggression, where any sense of limits get put on them, they react very differently, almost like the the intoxicated person who's had enough to drink, and then someone says something quite plain or bland, but they'll react to that as if, what are you trying to say to me, right? And it's a similar type of reaction. So there's that inherent biological impact that whether it's about light entering our eyes or whether it's about the stimulation that the activity is doing to their brain. And then there's the other larger cultural problem, which is how we portray people using substances and drinking alcohol as always happy and always cool, and from all that I've seen, always good looking. So really hard to break that.
Yes, and I think coming from someone who, when I was in early high school, it was MySpace and then Facebook and then Twitter and then Instagram, like my early adulthood and now my adult life has been on social media. So there's very rarely a time where you go out and you don't post what you're eating or you're drinking, your brunches, your dinners, your drinks and things like that. So a lot of people are constantly being overwhelmed by the looks of it, of the amount of alcohol and drug use that is going on social media as well. So there is a lot to unpack there, but we might move on to our next question, which is, when you know someone is suffering from substance abuse as a result of mental health, how can you safely get them to seek help if they aren't willing to do it themselves due to not trusting authority or not liking opening up to strangers?
I have got this, and sorry if I was cutting you off there, Anthony, but I think that people, there's a word that we don't often think about, even in the mental health sector, and the word that I want to ask everyone to think about more and be aware of is the word of shame. So shame is what stops us from seeking help. Shame is a result of all of our assumptions about ourselves, because we've heard so many messages that we're never going to amount to anything, or you're just a bonghead, or you just drink so much alcohol, and that it's that creates this doubt in you, that you will ever get better, and then because what you have, the task that you set yourself to try and begin a journey of recovery is such a huge one, that to take that first step, if you have doubt whether you're ever going to be able to do it anyway because no one else believes in you, that's going to be really hard. So to me, it's about having enough people in your corner that's going to say, have a go, I believe in you anyway, even if you fail, or even if you relapse, or it doesn't matter how many times it takes you to have a go at it. To me, that's that to me is a crucial aspect of getting started on that journey, from helping, from starting recovery when you've got a mental health issue.
Yeah, look, I agree with many points there. I think I touched on it earlier. One of the key things you've got to try and help someone discover is that willingness to want to change. And it's always the case when, as someone in a support network for an individual that might be struggling with addiction, the denial is normally going to be pretty strong. And it's always hard, and they will get their back up when you're kind of pointing out their defects, or when you're trying to instill a bit of shame on them around what they're perhaps experiencing. You'll find that they'll close up, and addiction really grows in the dark as well. And so what you need to do, though, as a support network, there are boundaries that need to be put in place. There are non-negotiables that should be discussed, and evidence that should be put on the table. Because often when you're in the chaos of addiction and your denial is so strong, you don't see the ripple effect of your lifestyle and what it's doing to others around you. And you often can be very delusional about where you might be, and you always think you're in control of your addictions. One of the key things in the early parts of recovery is how you kind of surrender that control in terms of when it comes to your addiction. So helping people find that place is often, and again, I said it earlier, it's often what goes against what we feel in our hearts. We want to love people back to life that we care about. But sometimes there is a hardline approach that doesn't always it's not always one single template that applies here, but there is more data to suggest when you can set up a non-negotiable kind of plan that is consistent amongst a support network around an individual as well. You can't have one person kind of prepared to enable at a certain level and the other not, that might be around a particular person that's suffering from addiction. So having a kind of a plan that everyone conforms to, and then helps inspire that willingness in an individual to put up their hand and seek some help. Once you've got that ingredient with recovery, success rates are pretty high, because someone is then teachable again. They surrender the things that they've been trying to kind of fight for so long. So yeah, that's my comments there, guys.
So we'll move on to another question. This is one that I see a lot in my day-to-day work, which is, given that substance abuse problems begin after the need for genuine pain relief post-surgery or traumatic incident, and I think in this instance we're speaking specifically about prescription medication, how can hospitals better manage this?
It's an age-old question, and it's not just about pain medication. It's also, and in the mental health area, it's about benzodiazepines and, and addiction to, Valium or any of a whole host of benzodiazepines. I think that, I can only speak from my point of view, because obviously this is a really difficult area for doctors to manage. There are a couple of problems here. One is that there are some doctors that prescribe medication despite a lack of evidence, right? So, for example, long-acting opiate medication, if there is no evidence that it works, that it's in the end all that helpful, other than if you have cancer, other than if you have cancer pain. So using that for back pain, or using that for any other pain that, often is prescribed and then forgotten. So, it's the prescription isn't always just, well, let's use this for 3 days and then we're going to do all this other stuff around you to support you. It's not often like that. And I think part of that is because doctors are trying to be helpful. Doctors are trying to relieve people's symptoms. Families are desperate. People are desperate. And so we're desperately trying to help them by saying, okay, let's use this medication. But, the best way to manage it is we need to be mindful that we are probably creating other problems down the track. And maybe there are other things that we need to put in place for this person, which is going to be hard because you can't do it by yourself as a GP and you've got 10 minutes. But, and this is where there's a lack of other support services that can help that person. Otherwise, the doctor is left to the prescription pad to try and relieve the problem.
Yeah, I would like to add a little bit to what Alberto was saying. Actually, one of the common reasons that Valium, for example, is prescribed is to help people to sleep. But actually, there is no real sleeping pill at all. The Valium is actually a sedative. It's not actually, doesn't help you to, it may help you to sleep, but the quality of the sleep is pretty bad. And so it's better to seek other ways of getting better sleep than actually simply taking a benzodiazepine, right? Because there are different stages of sleep. All of these are important for not only just mental health, but also for physical health. For example, if you don't sleep enough, and you get your chance of getting heart attack is more if you don't get more than 5 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep. And so, benzodiazepines really do not help actually getting good quality sleep. So the best thing is to seek other ways of getting proper sleep.
I do tend to agree with that. An anecdotal piece from me, I had a patient a little while ago who we looked up on a wonderful program that the Victorian government has initiated called SafeScript, which has all the different things and prescribing of medications they think might cause addiction in the future, including opioid-based pain relief, benzodiazepines, and certain antipsychotics as well. And this wonderful little lady in the last few months had had over 250 tablets of benzodiazepines dispensed for her. And as a part of the clinical team, it gave us an opportunity to sit down with her and ask her, was there any particular reason she was going through that much medication, and how we could better help her manage her sleeplessness. And it all came down in the end to, she was so anxious about her pain and she was so anxious about going through life that what she needed more than tablets was counseling and help and someone to listen and support her. So I think that's a really important point that both of you have brought up, that it can't just be the prescription. There needs to be other biopsychosocial help involved with all of this as well. So I think we've got time for one last question, which is, what are the most critical changes that we must make to face the future effectively, especially for those with addiction in their younger years of life?
I think there's, from my perspective, a really quick and simple answer to that, and it's better education. I think, it all starts with education here. If we can get to people earlier, certainly from my own personal journey, I said it in my story, had I known the things that I know today, there were all pivotal points in time along that kind of 15-year progression for me through addiction where I would have made different life choices. I certainly never thought all those years later I'd be sitting here on a mental health forum saying I'm a recovering drug addict, but it's exactly what I am. So I think it absolutely starts with education, education in our schools too, education for people in the home environments and support for families.
I'd also add a different type of education too, which is that I think that we need to get better at educating parents and families about emotional development in children and recognizing when young people are struggling before they seek the release from a substance. And also, and so there can be subtle signs where the young person or the teenager might be becoming more irritable, and the parent might see that as bad behavior or acting out or part of normal adolescence, but actually they are clues that there's actually lots of things going on in their mental state, that there's actually lots of shame, or there's actually lots of self-doubt that it's already going on, and that's just what's showing on the surface. So to me, that part of that education has to be an understanding of what young people look like, what your kids look like at home when they're not doing very well. Because sometimes it's great, you might think, oh, they're really good because they're really studying in their room. I'm not sure that's always the case. Sometimes they're isolating because they're really struggling being with people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Anthony and Alberto. Such education, both self-directed and also at schools and also by parents, and all around. I think the more knowledge we get about this and spread it around young people, it's better. Yeah.
Wonderful. I think also a really important point to add there is looking at the language that everyone uses around people who have a substance abuse disorder and making sure you're not using language that's alienating them. I think it's really important that people use that self-education to be able to know how the right way to approach someone would be in terms of wanting to help them with their addiction as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Especially thank you to Anthony, Sagar, and Alberto for all your help and your time today during this panel discussion. We hope everyone found this educational and helpful for them. If you have any questions or you'd like to know any more information, please speak to the Mental Health Foundation Australia. You can get in contact with us via our social media or our 1300 number, which is on our website, which is mhfa.org.au. We have a few more events coming up for Mental Health Month, which ends at the end of October, and we would love your support and help in continuing to stimulate this conversation and keep this conversation flowing. I think substance abuse in particular is a topic in mental health that a lot of people don't like to move forward and encourage that conversation for. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye-bye.